This tutorial is to give you some handy tools for being able to control and modify light in your photos. The same principles would apply for artificial light or for natural light. The light that we see here could be sunlight coming through a window onto a tabletop. This particular case I actually used a 1000-watt quartz light, but the principle is the same. Now you can see that the light we're starting with here is a single light. Each light creates a highlight and a shadow. This light is a very contrasty light. Contrast is generally determined by the size of the light source. The smaller the light source, the more contrasty it is. And one of the contrastiest light sources is the sun on a clear day. Small light source, you're saying the sun is hardly a small light source. Well, perceptually it is. You know, if you were to judge it from your own perspective, holding a dime out at arm's length is about the same size as the sun. So in effect, it really is a small light source as far as we are concerned down here on the planet Earth. Okay, so this is a direct light. Now, one of the things that you can see is that the difference between the highlights and the shadows is pretty great. You can just barely see any shadow detail in here. So what if we wanted to have this not be so dramatic and not so contrasty? Well, the easiest thing to do is to just bring in a white card and bounce it. You can see what happens. It just fills in that light. And because it's a bounce card, it doesn't create any new shadows. It just fills in shadows. Now you can see several things though. It does a much better job of filling in these shadows than it does over here, because these shadows aren't really seeing that light or that bounce card so much. Okay, and we can vary how much we fill it in by just simply moving it in or out. It's pretty simple. Okay, now another thing we could do is we could go from a white card to something that's silver. This is actually a light disc, or a Photoflex light disc. It's silver on one side and white on the other. It collapses and goes in a nice carrying case, and it's about a 3-foot diameter circle. And you can see what it does. It fills it in even more. So now the difference here is getting pretty subtle. And you can see that as we reduce the contrast, we also reduce the apparent texture in the subject that we're photographing. Okay, now another thing we could do is, let's go back to our original here. Another thing we could do is we could hang up a big piece of white sheet, white nylon, any kind of white fabric in front of our light, thereby causing it to become diffused and much larger. Here's what would happen if we did that. Here's our original light, and here it is going through a diffuser. You can see several things that happen. First of all, the shadow gets real soft, and the light now, because it's a big light source, it can wrap around. Now I should point out that as I said, I did these with quartz lights, and it is not without reason that quartz lights are called hot lights. They get extremely hot. They can burn you, they can start fires, so you want to be very careful in working with quartz lights. This is a 1000-watt quartz light, and it does get hot. If I got my nylon diffuser too close to the light, it could easily catch on fire. So be very careful. But as I say, the same thing, this same principle would work if this was sunlight coming through a window. Okay, so here's the direct light, and there it is through the diffuser. Now another thing we could also do is we could use the diffuser in conjunction with a bounce card, and you can see that that fills in that shadow side a little bit more. Now we could also change this white card to a piece of mirror. I'm one of those guys that on trash day, if I see a nice piece of broken mirror that somebody's put out for the trash, I'm probably going to stop and pick it up. You never know when you might need a piece of mirror. And here's something else you can do with mirror. This is just a piece of black foam core with a whole bunch of chunks of mirror hot glued onto it at various angles. And what this does is this, when I reflect a bright light, sunlight, quartz light, electronic flash, whatever, against it, it starts to create bright patterns of light, but irregular patterns of light. So it's a pretty interesting thing. Naturally, you have to be careful of this because it's all sharp edges. And you don't want to. We actually called this the cruel reflector because it was easy to cut yourself whenever you used it. But here's the kind of things we can do with it. By by bouncing the direct light off this mirrored surface, you can see that you can get a pretty interesting looking light. And just by moving the mirror a little bit, you can really change how it's illuminating your subject. If you're doing these with a larger subject, like for example a person outside, then all the tools that you get that you use have to be larger as well. You may have seen portrait photographers outside with an assistant holding a big bounce card while they were doing photos of somebody outside. But that's basically how this stuff all works. And there are expensive tools that do this stuff, but you can make them yourself. You can take a piece of foam core and tape tinfoil to one side so that you have one side that's white and the other side that's tinfoil. That's pretty easy, and it's pretty effective. So any kind of problem that you have, you can probably figure out a way to solve it and make your life easier.